Welcome, future educators. Today, we're diving into something, well, deep. We're talking about Sigmund Freud's psychosexual theory of development. Yep, it might sound like a complex mix of psychology and biology, but don't worry, by the end of this, you'll be able to explain it like you're teaching your own class of future psychologists. Let's get into it. Now, here's the man himself, Sigmund Freud. He is considered the founder of psychoanalysis and father of psychiatry. Think of him as the Sherlock Holmes of the human mind. He was the guy who thought, hey, what if we could figure out why people do what they do by examining how their minds work? And he didn't stop there. Freud gave us a roadmap to understand human behavior and personality development. Freud believed our personality comes from the constant battle between three forces in our minds, the ID, ego, and superego. Think of it like the ultimate showdown between your desires, your logic, and your sense of right and wrong. Here's a fun analogy. The ID is like that little devil on your shoulder, always whispering, go for it. The ego is the guy in the middle trying to keep everyone happy, and the superego? Well, that's your angel, constantly reminding you to do the right thing. Let's go deeper with each psychic apparatus. Let us start with the ID. The ID, the most primitive of the three structures, is concerned with instant gratification of basic physical needs and urges. And it operates entirely unconsciously, outside of conscious thought. If your ID walked past someone with ice cream, it would just snatch it up without a second thought. The ID doesn't care about rules or consequences, it just wants what it wants. Think of the ID like a toddler in a candy store, pure impulse, zero restraint. And, let's be honest, haven't we all had ID moments at buffets? Secondly, the superego. It is concerned with social rules and morals, similar to what many people call their conscience or their moral compass. It develops as a child learns what their culture considers right and wrong. If your superego was in charge, you'd politely walk past the stranger eating ice cream, knowing it's rude to take their food. But if your ID and superego were in a tug-of-war, and the ID won, you'd still grab that ice cream, but feel really guilty afterward. So, if you ever feel guilty after binge-watching Netflix instead of studying, that's your superego making sure you know you should have been productive. Lastly, in contrast to the instinctual ID and the moral superego, the ego is the rational, pragmatic part of our personality. It is less primitive than the ID and is partly conscious and partly unconscious. It's what Freud considered to be the self, and its job is to balance the demands of the ID and superego in the practical context of reality. The ego is like the sensible mediator in a heated debate. If your ID wants ice cream, but your superego says it's wrong to steal, your ego steps in and says, let's compromise, go buy your own ice cream. It's like your ego is the adult in the room, keeping you from making decisions that'll end in either instant regret or sugar-fueled chaos. According to our slide here, Freud believed that the ID, ego, and superego are in constant conflict and that adult personality and behavior are rooted in the results of these internal struggles throughout childhood. He believed that a person who has a strong ego has a healthy personality and that imbalances in this system can lead to neurosis, what we now think of as anxiety and depression, and unhealthy behaviors. Allow me to explain it further. Freud believed that the ego plays the role of balancing out two opposing forces inside our minds, the ID, which is driven by our basic desires and instincts, and the superego, which is concerned with doing the right thing based on moral and societal rules. The ego acts like a mediator or referee in this constant battle. A strong ego means that a person is able to balance these forces well. For example, if you really want something, like the ice cream we mentioned earlier, but you know it's wrong to just take it, your ego helps you find a solution, like going to buy your own ice cream. This balance means you can deal with reality in a healthy and realistic way. You can handle your desires without breaking rules or hurting others. On the other hand, if there's an imbalance, meaning one part of your mind is dominating the others, it can cause problems. For example, if the ID is too strong, a person might become impulsive, doing whatever they feel like without thinking of the consequences. This could lead to risky or harmful behaviors. If the superego is too strong, a person might become overly critical or harsh on themselves, feeling constant guilt or anxiety over their actions. When this balance is off for a long time, it can lead to what Freud called neurosis, which today we might refer to as anxiety, depression, or other emotional difficulties. In simple terms, a person may feel overwhelmed by guilt, worry, or fear because their inner conflicts, between id, ego, and superego, aren't being managed well. For teachers, understanding this balance is important because some students might display behaviors like impulsivity or extreme self-criticism, which could be related to an imbalance in how they're handling their desires and moral rules. This can affect their learning and social interactions in the classroom. So, a healthy personality according to Freud means having a strong ego that can keep the id and superego in check, allowing the person to function well in daily life without constantly feeling anxious or acting impulsively. Again, Freud believed that the balance, or lack thereof, between these forces shapes our personality. Too much id? You might make impulsive decisions. Too much superego? You might be overly critical of yourself. A strong ego is the key to maintaining a healthy personality. Freud also believed that our journey through childhood is a bit like an obstacle course, where each stage of development has its own pleasure zone. Sounds weird? Stay with me, Freud had a point. Here on our next slide, you can see here the overview of the stages oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Each correspond to a different phase of our childhood, and each has its own challenges. If these needs aren't met, we might get, well, stuck. The idea of fixation occurs to when a person is stuck in one stage of psychosexual development. Both frustration/understimulation and overindulgence/overstimulation may lead to what psychoanalysts call fixation at a particular psychosexual stage. Just imagine, if you didn't get enough comfort in the oral stage, you might develop habits like nail biting or excessive talking. And if you were overindulged, you could also fixate on these behaviors. So, if you're a nail biter, maybe Freud would say you were underfed during your baby bottle years. Who knew, right? Anyways, let us start with the discussion of each stages. 1. Oral stage. Pleasure focused on the mouth. Babies are all about the mouth, eating, sucking, chewing. According to Freud, if they get too much or too little of this, they might develop oral fixations later on. If a person always has gum in their mouth or is a little too attached to their coffee cup, Freud might say they didn't get enough, or maybe got too much, oral pleasure as a baby. On our next slide, let's talk about fixation on this stage. Let's begin with oral receptive fixation. This occurs when a child experiences understimulation during the oral stage. For instance, if a child is weaned too early or doesn't get enough oral gratification, they might not develop a healthy relationship with this pleasure area. In adulthood, individuals with oral receptive tendencies might engage in behaviors that bring them oral pleasure to compensate for that early lack of satisfaction. This can manifest as a stronger tendency to smoke, drink alcohol, overeat, or even nail bite. So, if you see your friend munching on snacks like there's no tomorrow during a movie, they might just be channeling their inner oral receptive. They're finding comfort in those crunchy popcorn kernels or those sweet gummy bears. Now, let's flip the coin and look at oral aggressive fixation. This occurs when a child experiences overstimulation during the oral stage. Imagine a scenario where a child is overly indulged, perhaps through prolonged breastfeeding or constant feeding. In adulthood, this overindulgence can lead to some pretty interesting behaviors. Oral aggressive individuals might express their frustrations through verbal means, like cursing, gossiping, or being verbally aggressive. Instead of seeking comfort, they might be sharp with their words. Picture this, you're in the teacher's lounge, and there's that one colleague who seems to have an endless supply of juicy gossip. They might just be expressing their oral aggressive side. Instead of reaching for a snack, they're reaching for the latest drama to share, because hey, words can be just as satisfying. To summarize, oral receptive individuals might be those who find solace in snacks during stressful times, while oral aggressive individuals could be the ones dishing out sharp comments or gossip. Understanding these behaviors can help us become more empathetic and aware of how our early experiences shape who we are as adults. Next stage is anal stage. During potty training, kids are learning control. If parents are too strict, the child might grow up overly organized, what we call anal retentive. But if parents are too relaxed, the child might become messy, anal expulsive. So, if you know someone who's a neat freak or someone who lives in chaos, maybe it all goes back to how they handled potty training. Let's move to the next slide. Similar to oral stage, anal stage also have fixation concepts. Let's dive into the first concept, anal retentive fixation. This usually stems from experiences during the anal stage of development, particularly when a child undergoes early or harsh toilet training. Think of a child who's subjected to strict training, where they're constantly pressured to hold it or do it right. As a result, these children can grow up with an intense obsession with cleanliness, perfection, and control. In adulthood, this might manifest as someone who's super organized to the point of obsession. You know, the type of person who arranges their pens by color and size? You can bet they're an anal retentive. Their need for control extends to their environment, where everything has a place, and there's no room for chaos. Now, let's shift gears to anal expulsive fixation. This typically arises from liberal toilet training, where a child is encouraged to be free and expressive about their bodily functions. So, picture a child who's allowed to do their thing without much guidance, maybe it's a little too laid back. As a result, these children may grow up to be more messy and disorganized. You might find them living in a space that resembles a tornado hit it. In adulthood, this can look like someone who is laid back to the extreme. Their desk is cluttered with papers, their car might be a mobile storage unit for snacks and clothes, and they're the friend who can never find their keys. But hey, at least they're having fun and living life on their own terms, right? To sum it up, anal retentive individuals may be those who keep their lives impeccably organized and have a strong need for control, while anal expulsive individuals tend to embrace a more relaxed and chaotic lifestyle. Understanding these traits can help us recognize different personality types we might encounter in our future classrooms. On this third stage, phallic stage, pleasure is focused on the genitals. This is where kids become curious about their bodies. Freud thought boys develop what he called an Oedipus complex, seeing their fathers as rivals for their mother's affection. Let's explain it further. Alright, let's explore the fascinating and somewhat controversial terms, Oedipus complex and Electra complex. First up is the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex refers to a boy's feelings of rivalry with his father for his mother's love and affection. Imagine a little boy who sees his mom as the queen of his world. In his mind, dad is like that annoying new player on the team who suddenly steals the spotlight. The boy wants to be the favorite, which can lead to feelings of jealousy. Now, this doesn't mean he literally wants to knock dad off the throne, it's more about those complex emotions that arise as he navigates his developing identity and relationships. It's an emotional tug-of-war for the boy's attention and affection. Now, let's talk about the Electra complex, which is essentially the female counterpart to the Oedipus complex. In the Electra complex, a girl sees her mother as a rival for her father's attention. Picture a little girl who idolizes her dad and wants to be the apple of his eye. She might think, why does mom get so much time with him? This rivalry can spark some complex emotions in the young girl as she strives for her father's affection. Just like the Oedipus complex, this isn't about any real competition, it's part of the child's development and their understanding of family dynamics. Don't worry, this is a natural part of development. It's all about figuring out gender roles and family dynamics. Now, here's a fun trivia for you before we proceed to the next stage. Did you know that the term Oedipus complex comes from the Greek myth of Oedipus, who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother? It's a wild story and reflects the intense themes of love and rivalry. Next stage is latency stage. Now, things calm down. Kids focus on learning, playing, and making friends. Freud called this the quiet period where social and intellectual skills take center stage. Basically, it's the phase where kids can just be kids. Now on our last stage, genital stage. Pleasure shifts to peers. During adolescence, Freud said sexual urges reawaken, but this time, they're directed toward peers. It's the final stage where people learn to form mature, romantic relationships. So when teenagers start showing interest in dating, Freud would say it's all part of growing into this stage. Now, let's explore the fifth and final stage of Freud's psychosexual development, the genital stage. This stage typically begins around puberty, around ages 12 to 13, and continues into adulthood. During this period, the focus shifts back to the genitals, but unlike earlier stages, it's not just about self-pleasure, it's about developing mature sexual relationships. This stage is characterized by the emergence of sexual urges directed toward peers rather than parents, signaling a significant shift in emotional and social dynamics. As individuals navigate this stage, they ideally develop the capacity for love and work, meaning they can form healthy, intimate relationships while also being productive in their personal and professional lives. A strong ego is crucial during this time, as it helps balance the desires of the id and the moral constraints of the superego, allowing individuals to enjoy their sexuality responsibly. Successful navigation of the genital stage indicates emotional maturity and the ability to engage in meaningful relationships based on mutual respect and trust. However, unresolved conflicts from earlier stages, such as the Oedipus and Electra complexes, can hinder emotional growth. Individuals who have not successfully navigated those earlier stages may struggle with intimacy or commitment in their adult relationships. Therefore, the genital stage serves as a culmination of Freud's theory, emphasizing the importance of addressing earlier developmental conflicts to foster healthy emotional and social development in adulthood. In summary, the genital stage is all about forming deep connections and embracing one's sexual identity in a mature way. It's the final step in Freud's framework, where individuals learn to balance their desires with societal expectations, leading to fulfilling relationships and personal fulfillment. So, why does all this matter to us as teachers? Understanding these stages helps us identify where students might be developmentally, and how their past experiences might influence their current behavior. As future educators, this awareness can help us support our students holistically, both in their learning and personal growth. Thanks for sticking around, future educators. Remember, Freud's theory might be old school, but it gives us a foundation for thinking about how childhood experiences shape the adults our students will become. Until next time, keep that ego strong, balance the id and superego, and maybe don't steal anyone's ice cream.